Mrs. Annie Matheson of Southampton will be 92 January 16th. Mrs. Jane C. Mullen of Bruce Lee Haven, Walkerton will be 93 January 15th. Mrs. Elizabeth Herbert of Mapleton Nursing Home, Listowel was 98 January 3rd. Mr. and Mrs. Joseph H. Weber of RN No. 1 Waterloo were married 64 years, January 7th. Mrs. Olive Kirkpatrick of Knowlecrest Home, Milverton was 95 January 9th. Mr. and Mrs. Mervyn Johnson of RN No. 1 Chatsworth have been married 60 years. Mr. Basil Kidd of Williamsford celebrated his 101st birthday. Mrs. Marianne Schill of Freeport Hospital, Kitchener, from Formosa, was 92 January 4th. Mrs. Minnie Shire of Maitland Manor, Godrich, was 100 January 5th. Mr. and Mrs. Laurel Butson of Fullerton were married 60 years, January 1st. Mr. and Mrs. Doyle Braithwaite of Durham were married 63 years, December 30th. Mr. William Harriet of Jerry Care Nursing Home, Harriston, was 92 December 28th, and Mr. Ed Atkinson of Grey Owen Sound Lodge, Markdale, was 100 January 2nd. Mr. William Bowie of Owen Sound will be 97 on January 11th.
Congratulates Mrs. James Taylor, Brookhaven, 100 years of age on January the 18th. Michael Mulhall, Mount Forest, 90 on January the 19th. Mr. William Emerton, 95 years of age on January the 12th. Mrs. Laura Jakes of Harriston, 94 years of age, January 15th. Mr. Alex McKenzie of Lucknow, 93 years old, January the 26th. Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Nicholson of Seaforth were married January 18th, 1918. Mrs. Bertha Stockoff of the Hillside Rest Home, Stratford, 91 years of age, January 18th. Charles Burt of Bruce Lee Haven, Walkerton, 90 years of age, January 22nd. Mrs. Keffer of Brussels, 92 years of age, January 30th. Mrs. Telford Keffer, age 94, January the 29th. Mrs. Joseph Cadieu of Port Severin, 92 years of age, January 23rd. Mrs. Georgia M. Taylor, Wellington Terrace Home in Elora, 95th birthday celebrated January 15th. Mr. Fred Ross of Owen Sound, 92 on February the 6th, and Mrs. Regina Maligny, 97 on January the 18th.